Okay, it does say preparing to live stream, so we're good to go there.
Okay.
So at this point, attendees can join as well.
And I'm going to close this and then launch again and see if that does it.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the instructions.
I got the same error message.
Look
I
at
can't start my video because the host just stopped. it.
Okay, I'm going to go look at the panelists.
If you hold a minute, I think John is trying to, he's got maybe a thought.
Yeah, so if you go to the participants menu,
Yeah,
There.
I'm looking at those and I see all the videos are blocked out. So I'm just trying to click on them to open them for you.
perfect.
Hmm,
I don't see it.
it's not letting me do that.
Oh, invite.
Okay, maybe down here perhaps. Allow panelists to rename. I'm gonna try this one.
Oh,
There we go.
there we go. You did it. Magic.
Yay, I found the button.
Might want to adjust your thing so you just.
Yeah.
Hey, very good.
Okay, sorry, guys. Let me know when you're ready to start recording. We'll just wait till everyone, till Kelvin.
let's-
There's Kelvin, great.
Yes,
Yeah,
let's wait
Commissioner
till Cliff comes up here.
I'm here.
There he is.
Okay. And then Cliff, maybe you could show us what happens when you go to share your screen. Make sure that works okay.
Okay. Come on. Working?
Yep.
Oh, there we go. Yes. Okay.
Yes, now.
All right. Let me just grab an item or two here and we'll get going.
Good job, Tammy, by the way.
Well, it was a rush, but we got her. Thanks for your help.
Yeah, nice job, Tammy. And good recovery. Just so everybody knows, we had IT had kind of taken over the portable today because of things that were happening downtown at City Hall and the courthouse. And so they relocated out here to do their work for the day, and they will tomorrow as well. So it may have probably led to some of the little glitches we had getting set up out in the portable. So Tammy's set up instead in her office and had to kind of rejigger everything.
All right. Well, I get to do it without a mask tonight.
Let me know when you want to start recording.
Okay. All right. I think that we are ready to start recording and everybody got. Okay. The Whatcom County Planning Commission for January 28th, 2021 is called to order. I'll read the roll call. Robert Bartell will not be here tonight. Kelvin Barton, that's me. I'm here. Tool Desmani. Not hearing a Tool yet. Jim Hansen.
Here.
Stephen Jackson.
Here.
Kimberly Lund. Think she'll be joining us shortly. John Mayberry.
Here.
Natalie McClendon.
Here.
Dominic Masseri.
Here.
Right. Please join me for the flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the
Flag of the United States
of America.
and
To the republic
for which it
which it
stands,
stands,
Under God.
one nation, under God, with liberty
liberty and justice.
for all.
You
Right.
forgot that we stand for it.
Right. Director Personius, would you please give us a department update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, everybody. Just a couple things for you. It's been a busy January so far for us. We looked at our building permits that we received last year in 2020, the year of, well, the first year of COVID. We all thought, you know, at least in by mid-year, it was going to be a really tough year in terms of the building industry and whatnot. And turns out we had more building permit applications received in 2020 than we did in 2019. And so our thinking is that that's probably kind of driven by the housing affordability issue and the rise in land values as well as housing values kind of driving the need to expand the supply of housing for affordability reasons. And so far in January, we're on the same trend. We're probably going to have a record number of building permits issued in the month of or applied for in the month of January. And some of that is driven in part by the new energy code that's going into effect. The state energy code is going into effect this coming Monday. And so a lot of folks are concerned in the building side about getting their permits, their building permit applications in before that date so they can best to that, because there's likely to be some increased cost in terms of energy efficiency. So anyway, that was just a little interesting tidbit for you. And kind of on that affordability issue as well, the executive has intends to engage in conversation with the city mayors through the mayors group that they meet monthly with all the 7 cities plus the county executive meet, and they have some concerns about housing affordability. And so we're going to be talking with them about the one option of working together collaboratively with all the cities and the county on a regional affordable housing plan. The idea would be to get some kind of analysis of what workforce housing needs are, what the existing situation is regarding different incomes groups and the existing housing stock that are affordable to them under the affordable housing formulas, and the number of houses that are not affordable to them in those different groups, and then look at some strategies for how all the jurisdictions could address those issues. At this point, it's rather nascent. It's just an idea that we're going to be talking with the mayors next week about and see if they're interested in pursuing it. But conceptually, it would be a collaborative process that all the jurisdictions could work on to get some ideas on the board. Lots of folks are throwing ideas out, and this would be kind of be a platform or a venue to kind of vet those ideas. And then it would lead into our next, for all the jurisdictions, our next GMA comp plan update, which is due in 2025. And so it might be a nice little platform to kind of come up with some ideas that all the jurisdictions could look at to amend their codes or amend their regulations to provide for more affordable housing. So that's just a little intro on it. Stay tuned. We'll have more news as the idea progresses or not. We're hoping internally as a department, because of our, the number of permit intakes we're taking at the moment we've had a couple positions frozen, during the last year, during the budget cycle, because of the budget implications of COVID. And so we're hoping to get some of those positions unfrozen this year, hopefully early this year. And we've passed those concerns on to the administration. So we'll see where that goes. I think some of that will depend upon whether there's any relief coming out of the federal government for city and county and state governments out of any COVID, any additional COVID relief monies that might be available this year. So we'll stay tuned to that. And the last thing I wanted to mention to you guys is just the next meeting, your February 11th meeting, while we'll continue with the S&P update, we'll start that meeting. Tammy will start that meeting as your annual business meeting. And so we'll seat the new old commissioners, the 3 commissioners who were reappointed. And then that's the time to look at your bylaws and chairmanship and all that kind of stuff, all that fun procedural stuff you guys do. So that will sort of kick off that meeting, and then we'll resume with the S&P update deliberations that you guys are on. That's all I've got for you guys. If you guys have any questions for me, otherwise I'm gonna sign off because the dog is scratching at the door. He wants in.
Are there any questions for Mark?
I have one quick question.
Commissioner Desmani?
Is there any update from Mark or maybe Natalie on the public participation plan?
I can respond to that. Or-
Yeah,
Go ahead, Mark.
I'll let Natalie speak to that.
Okay, the answer is no. There's nothing working going forward. I tried to get on their agenda on Tuesday. This past Tuesday, they had a meeting and they have just a lot of other stuff on their plate. And I think what I need to do is talk to a few of the individual council members and see if maybe there's something that I can personally do to like do some of the background research to get things going or something. I don't know. We're going to have to figure out how to make it happen.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanson?
Just a comment on the affordable housing issue, and I just urge you to somehow help planning provide clarity into this issue around the misunderstanding that it's mitigations and permits that are causing the rise in housing costs. And if there is anything that can be done, it would sure be great if it would be targeted towards low-income housing rather than further enhancing the profits of the developers who are so set on providing the more profitable high-end housing.
Are there any other questions for Mark? Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Now is the time for open session for public comment. And Tammy, would you let the attendees know how to unmute themselves? I've never done that, and I don't always remember exactly how to do it.
Attendees, if you would like to speak during this public comment period, you may press *9 to raise your hand, and that will trigger me to unmute you.
Thank you. I wrote it down, Tammy. I am not seeing any attendees raising their hand to speak. So now
Oh, there's one.
Okay. Go ahead. Not sure which one it is. It's not showing on the screen, but someone has their hand up there.
Okay, it's Ed Miller, and go ahead.
Yes, hello. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. I just wanted to make just a couple of brief comments, and that's with the assumption that we're talking about the critical areas ordinance tonight. I wasn't completely clear on that from the agenda. Is that the case, Cliff? Well, I don't know.
Cliff, you're muted.
Let's see. Cliff is, it shows he's unmuted. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm ready now. So the goal was to finish up with 23. I have some follow-up things to go over with the council, some questions that they asked last time. and then see if there's anything else in 23. And if there's time after finishing with 23, then we could start 16. It all depends on how
Well,
long it takes.
Okay, well, that's up to you. I just had I sent in some comment letters before, and I was just going to make just a general quick statement about the critical areas ordinance. I could just say that now, or I could wait till another meeting. What is?
Well, and I'm sure that we will be addressing it over the course of
Okay.
at least one more meeting.
Okay, well, thanks. Again, my name is Ed Miller. I'm a wetland biologist consultant in Whatcom County. I've been working here a long time and work with the critical areas code in several versions and several staffs before this one. And, in working with people around the county all the time and working with staff, I get to see all different angles of the code. And, when looking over the rewrite we have now, and, I've sent in some letters and made a lot of statements, so I won't kind of go through all that. But just in general, I'd like to say that I feel this is a substantial rewrite of the critical areas code. I almost feel that it's more substantial than the one we did in 2017. A lot of the changes that we have in there really speak to the substantive parts of the code, including reasonable use, more regulated areas, all of the buffer stuff and mitigation. And I don't see a lot of, in staff's response, a lot of clear reasoning and why some of these changes are being made. And I feel like they have the potential to have a lot of effect on people around Whatcom County with respect to land and buildability. I also feel that a lot of the stuff in the rewrite is not defined, and it will be a lot more variability. Already right now, it's quite difficult to advise people because, well, staff and the code are quite variable. So I feel even we go into this rewrite and I would have no idea what to tell people on what it would be regulated on their property. There's so many different ways staff could interpret some of the things in there. Some
30
of the
seconds remaining.
What's that?
I'm sorry, you have 30 seconds remaining.
Oh, okay, I was about done. I just feel that there are so many different ways it could be interpreted, and it's not clear how some of them would be applied, that it would be extremely difficult to tell people what to expect. So that's about it.
Ed, can you hold there with us for just a moment? Commissioner Masseri, did you have a question for Ed?
It's just a comment. Ed mentioned the comments that he had sent in. I've seen those, but I believe it was sent to me by a different group. I don't know if it's been fully disseminated to the planning commission, so that'd probably be a good thing to get sent out to everybody.
All of Mr. Miller's comments are included in that original packet of public comments, plus that table of the synopsis of the public comments where there's some responses.
Yeah, the second letter I sent, I thought I sent to the whole planning commission or to the website, but.
And that may be,
Yeah.
but your original ones I did address, and they're included on the webpage and in your packets.
So that's all I have. Just, yeah.
All right, thank you, Ed. Are there any other attendees that would like to speak in open session for public comment? Okay, then let's move on to commissioner comments. Any commissioners like to speak? And I am not seeing any hands up from commissioners, so let's move on to approval of minutes. And we have two sets to approve. And it is June 25th of 2020. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll move to approve them.
Second it.
Is there any discussion, corrections, or anything? All right, Tammy, would you call the roll, please? I think you're muted on there. There you go.
I got it. Bartel,
Not here.
Commissioner Bartel, oh, he's not here? Okay. Commissioner Desmani? Oh, that's right, he's absent.
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Passes 7 and 1 absent, 2 absent.
And then January 14th, 2021, would someone make a motion to approve or any corrections?
I'll move to approve.
I think Commissioner Jackson's trying to speak, but I think you're muted there. I can see,
No.
there we go. Go ahead.
I don't, I was just thinking, I'm sorry. This is my thinking face.
Do we have a second on approval of the minutes from January?
I'll second it.
Okay. We have a motion and second to approve January 14th, 2021 minutes. Are there any corrections or discussion? All right, seeing none. Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. One quick question. Was that Commissioner Mayberry who made the motion? Yes, great, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Okay, that passes 7-0.
All right, thank you. Okay, so now we're on to our work session for the evening, and we left off last time with my notes here say it was 2340 that we left the staff. That would be Cliff and Ryan. We left them with questions about 2340. And so Cliff is going to begin with answering those questions and some of the clarifications.
Yep.
So Cliff, go ahead.
Thank you. So there were 4 things you asked for follow-up on. One was the sea level rise regulations and whether we could do a quick analysis of what the impacts might be. And I talked to our GIS person. We don't have that data right now, so I don't think that there's a quick way of doing it. Nor was that done in our scope for working on this. The council had talked about just adopting policies. And especially in doing so, we would also need to do the vulnerability analyses and figure out what the impacts actually are. And then you asked what our county attorney would say. I put that in the memo that she always advises against going beyond what the state regulations are. And if we don't do the background work, of course, that would give us further legal exposure. So whether that satisfies you or not, I'm just reporting on what I've heard. The other is the flood and shoreline stabilization issues. And Ryan worked on this part of it, so I'm going to let him talk about that, and I'll talk about the bulk provisions.
Okay, so in that section, we went back and asked Department of Ecology to weigh in on their interpretation of the flood hazard section and the shoreline stabilization section, and they kind of broke it down into the actual event or type. So if it's a flooding event, then that would be that you're trying to control. That would be under the flood hazard section. That's typically all those projects that we do through river and flood and their large comprehensive planning methodologies. So what I did is I went to the WAC guidelines for updating your SMP, which are actually codified in the WAC as basically statutes. And I cut and pasted the allowed uses and the when you can do flood hazard mitigation efforts.
And let me interrupt 1 second. And just to point out to the commissioners, that's what you're seeing on your screen now. Ryan went in and edited this section with what he was just talking about.
And so when you get to there, you can see there's a provision for protecting ongoing ag within the floodway and channel migration zone, as long as you don't further restrict the migrating channel.
And Ryan, can you pause just for a moment? Cliff, are you saying we're supposed to see something up on our screen right now?
Do you not see this thing that's moving up and down?
No.
Oh, I got to share again, don't I? Dang it. I forgot about that part.
And are we in 16 or 23?
We're in 23.
23.
There, it should be there now.
There we are.
All right. So
Thank you.
This is the new text he was talking about. So he went in and edited this. You guys don't have copies of this yet, but it will be included, in a future version.
It's just literally a cut and paste of state regulations into our code.
All right.
To help define what the state has determined may be allowed within that area. And that can be edited because we can be, more restrictive. But that's what they are allowing or recommending to allow within your Shoreline Master Program. So that kind of changes a little bit of how our code read last time you saw it, whereas it was a little bit more restrictive. Then I added the word structural to floodworks to be consistent with how the WAC is written. And then on the shoreline stabilization side of things, it's pretty prescriptive in there, and we had already pretty much cut and pasted the WAC, and so I didn't make any changes to that section. It didn't seem to be warranted, but that section is for if you're experiencing erosion, on a site specific, and it's not related to a flood event. So that's sort of what they had said.
So these changes were due to some questions that Commissioner Mayberry had, and I just want to make sure that you haven't read it, so I guess you're not satisfied. But do you have any follow-up questions?
Yeah, and so it was addressing that there didn't seem to be much provisions in our code for the ag related uses due to the fact that the shoreline stabilization section specifically calls for a primary structure to be in danger within 3 years. And this kind of lends to it as well, that there isn't much in the provisions in state law for protecting existing ongoing ag, except for that one little line there. And Chad was going to get back to me on if there's any other jurisdictions who have gone a different route, because he thought there might be. And so he was checking in for me, and I will send it out to you as soon as I hear from Ecology on that.
Okay.
If you could send it out, that'd be great. I'd like to look at it.
And I'd like to speak, but are there any commissioners would like to ask Ryan any questions there first?
I have.
Okay. Is that Commissioner Desmani?
Yes.
Okay, and so what's happening with the screen share right now? I'm not getting the hand raised, so bear with me. And but that's okay. Go ahead, Commissioner Desmani.
Would it be appropriate to review this one component of Chapter 23 at our next meeting, because we're just getting a chance to review it now, and leave it till the next meeting, and obviously do the other elements of checks in 23, but leave that for the next meeting?
As you wish. As the commission wishes.
And I have the screen sharing back. It had gone away when not the screen sharing, the participants and the hand raise. Commissioner Hanson, go ahead.
Two things, and maybe in line with what Commissioner Desmani is looking for, is I wonder if we could see or have notes showing what has been modified to make it more stringent or less stringent than the previous code.
So as I pointed out in the memo last time and this time, that wherever Ryan and I have made any changes while you guys are undergoing your review, I put this, in my comment, I put note to PC right here. So if you use the Word version and you just search for that term, you'll see all the changes that we've made based on your conversations.
Go to PC under. So if I click on the comment box,
Now, when you open your document, go up here to your navigation bar and type in note to PC.
oh, wow.
And it's P/C. So it's in the memo. You'll see it. There's some corrections there.
And the other question is, have any modifications here been followed up in the critical areas ordinance? Because I noticed that there's sections relating to this there, and they would have to be consistent.
I have not, due to the fact that our shoreline management program jurisdiction is based on the 100-year floodplain, and so that would cover most of the flood hazard responsibilities. But we can always duplicate it in the SMP or move it to the SMP. But I mean, out of the SMP and into the CAO. But the frequently flooded area section of our CAO is primarily implementing the site-specific project FEMA habitat management plan.
All right. Ryan, I had a question for you, and from what I'm hearing, and I've heard a number of times, we're talking about WACs rather than RCWs, correct?
Right, because in the shoreline management program, the RCW states that ecology shall develop guidelines for the local jurisdictions to create their shoreline master programs. And so this is implementing that RCW, and it's in more greater detail.
And then a question I have, and this comes from a background of before I retired of work, and you use the word guideline, but I know in the WACs a lot of times they are famous for 3 words: should, shall, and may. And I'm wondering, yes, how many are there any of those words associated here?
Yes, and so what's also to pay attention to, especially in the Shoreline Master Program and Shoreline Master Program RCWs and WACs, is in the 70s, the state redefined what shall, should, and may mean. And so shall means you have to do it. Should means you have to do it unless it's unconstitutional or against the Shoreline Management Act. And may means that you are allowed to do it or may be permissible. So should really mean shall unless it's unconstitutional. So you have to read those shoulds not as a policy should, it's an actual directive. So, which is why the guidelines is a poor choice of terms, just like in the 70s, they chose the term shoreline exemption, which doesn't really mean you're exempt from anything. It just means that we don't have to notice your neighbors and go through a longer process. You still have to meet all of the codes. So again, a poor choice of words for permitting.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Desmani. Commissioner Desmani, I saw your hand up.
Yes, I'm sorry. I forgot to unmute. I just want to ask clarification on the constitutional comment. Are we still referring to state constitution?
Oh, and also you're protected under the U.S. Constitution as well. The state can't infringe on the U.S. constitutional rights either.
So are we all being given, private citizens being given judicial authority all of a sudden? That's very confusing. I've never heard an interpretation like that of a law. It's just very confusing to me. Can you clarify an example how?
Yeah, so if in the WAC guidelines it says you shall do this, then you're supposed to do it. And then if somebody challenges it legally, then you'd say you have to do this unless it's unconstitutional. And then during the legal process, they would say if it is or isn't constitutional. That's not for us to decide. We just have to apply it as a shall, and the should, as we have it defined in our SMP, says that you should do it unless it is in conflict with the Shoreline Management Act itself. And then you fall back on the Constitution.
Yeah, now I understand. Thank you. Yeah, I misunderstood. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Ryan, a quick question here. I know you won't have those definitions at your fingertip, but would you look those up and send them to Cliff and he could send them out to us? That'd be great.
They're in the we've put those definitions in the SMP definition section.
If you turn down here to the definitions.
I was wanting to look at the WACs actually.
Oh, yeah. I can send those out.
That would be awesome. Thank you. Right. Commissioners, any more questions for Ryan on this? Cliff and Ryan, you want to go ahead and continue?
Sure. So I took on the issue of the bulk tables because, and I got to thank Commissioner Mosseri because our consultant put that curtailed table together, and obviously we didn't go over it with a fine-tooth comb because there were a lot of inconsistencies like you pointed out. So what I did, I couldn't figure out a way of making the old one much better. So I deleted those newer ones and just went back to the old table and then filled it out for the Cherry Point Management Area column, put a new column there, updated some of the language, but all the numbers basically remaining the same. And then I entered land division because that hadn't been addressed per se. Okay, so you'll see that in your revised version of this. So thanks, because it's a little embarrassing, I guess. All right, so we got all these now. We got all these footnotes still, but I've tried to make them so that it's more legible at least. Okay, and then the last one was 5. Sorry. We got too many things going on here. Sorry, I don't have my memo in front of me. Oh, the stormwater regulations. You guys had just asked for a copy of that table that Ryan had put together, and I sent that out to your thing. So I hope that worked for you. So those were the follow-up things that I had. Apart from that, there's still from memo 4, the last memo, there was all the things we pointed out, but we were going through this code. I think you guys had dealt with those. We were going through this code, and we had ended, as your chair said, on this chapter. So I guess we'll entertain questions and issues that anybody might want to raise.
So, well, I'm not seeing any hands here. Cliff and Ryan, thank you. And I know you'll hang around for the evening. Commissioners, what would you like to do? Commissioner McClendon.
I have a question about on the memo, the second item on page 3, 1616, 680 wetlands mitigation standards.
Well, excuse me, Commissioner McClendon, we're still on Title 23, not Chapter 1616.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
Okay,
we're
never mind.
trying to finish up with that before we move on to the critical area stuff.
Okay.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I had a question. This is into definitions. It is 2360.080, number 9 for high intensity land use. First, I'm just wondering why we struck out new after or before agriculture.
Oh, this code had been written, it used the word new throughout. And Ryan and I came to the realization that the code would only apply to things being applied for, new things anyway. So we really didn't need to say new everywhere.
Okay, because it's my understanding that that was the qualifier for, I don't know if that's the right word, but being grandfathered in to not having to meet the high buffers in a lot of areas.
I'm not opposed to putting that one back in. I just, all the other ones that said, you know, where new houses are built and new commercials done, and it, to me, it just, you know, goes without saying that we're not going to make existing ones meet the rules about, you know, how you develop. Agriculture is slightly different, so I'm not opposed to putting that back in.
And Ryan, I think, wants to speak to this for a moment. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, that definition comes from Department of Ecology in their wetland guidance, and it doesn't use the term new.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And so.
Oh, that's right. I remember looking it up with you.
Yeah. So that's why one of the reasons why we struck it out there is because it to be consistent with the definition from the state.
Do you see potential impacts for requiring buffers on existing agriculture because of the removal of new?
No, the buffers would come out of the ongoing ag section through the CPAL program. And so it would still, those allowances to keep practicing ag within the buffers is still intact through the CAO.
Okay. And then my second question on that same definition is the definition for high intensity agriculture. It lists off dairies, nurseries, greenhouses, raising and harvesting crops requiring annual tilling. So annual tilling is the qualifier that puts it in the same category as commercial, urban, and industrial.
Correct. And so this would be when you're applying a wetland buffer to a project. And typically we don't, ongoing ag doesn't really get a wetland buffer applied to it. You have best management practices. So this would really apply really to new ag in general that are coming online when if you clear an area, do a timber harvest and convert to an ag crop, then there would be a buffer if there was a critical area on it. But ongoing ag would not be affected by this.
So is this a definition that we can't modify? This comes straight from the state?
Yeah, it comes straight from their wetland guidance section. I would have to talk to the Department of Ecology and their wetland folks on any modification that we do to it. But not that we can't bring it to them. I think that we need to address it with them first because they have to find consistency when we approve these regulations.
Yeah, because I just have a little bit of issue with the tilling part of it, just because tilling in agriculture is not necessarily a bad thing. It can prohibit runoff in most cases. That's why it's done in the majority of the agriculture that we do around here. If you don't come through and open up the topsoil, then it seals off, and that's when you get runoff. So to have that be a negative thing just seems a little backwards. I'm also concerned about going back and forth between crops. They mention orchards as being a medium intensity land use, which based off of the tilling definition, I believe blueberries would qualify as a medium intensity since there's no annual tilling. Whereas the other crops that we grow, raspberries, potatoes, strawberries, that would be considered high intensity. And if say a block of land were to go into blueberries, would it then be stuck, not be able to go back into a different crop that requires that annual tilling without then being subject to the buffers.
And so because it would be considered ongoing ag, you can switch between intensities of agricultural uses with an updated farm plan. So that is still allowed, but I do see your point that between the moderate and the high intensity. And so this is in ecology's guidance for this particular thing, it is the high intensity for managing wetlands. So how is the effect on the wetland itself from these uses is a high intensity use, whereas the moderate ones on the effect of the wetland itself is supposed to be a less impactful use. But as far as berries, there can be a potential high impact use or moderate use on some tilling too. So I see where you're coming from.
Yeah, I guess it would be nice to have some flexibility based on the geography of where the farming is being done. I'm assuming that this is just a blanket definition for the state where they promote no-till agriculture, say on the east side, because of topsoil erosion and all that. But really around here, it is much better to get good drainage in our soils as opposed to.
But I don't know that this has any real practical impact though, because as Ryan says, per our CAO, you can switch between high intensity, medium and low intensity agriculture by just amending your farm plan. And those are basically just what best practices are you going to use? And most of the farmers use best practices anyways, so.
Yeah, I agree, but as far as I know, really the only agriculture that uses farm plans is animal agriculture, at least in our county. And there's a handful that have farm plans, but the majority of us try and stay away from them because they're just a hassle.
Yeah, I will be happy to reach out to Miraz at Department of Ecology. He's the wetland person, Cliff, that we met with before, and ask them about this and what they're taking if we do have leeway within the definition itself.
Because if we were able to, stay away from consequences of buffers by the ongoing agriculture, it'd almost be better for us to have, say, blueberries included in high intensity, so that we're not limiting ourselves if we go back and forth.
Yeah.
I'll have another question for you in a little bit, but Commissioner Hanson has his hand up. Go ahead, Commissioner Hanson.
Good. Thanks. Wrong hand.
Okay. Commissioner Desmani.
I'd like to ask about the whole concept of intensity. How important of a concept is that in these code requirements? And where else are they showing up as far as agricultural intensity?
So the way that our wetland rating system for buffers or wetland buffers work is based upon two things. It's the habitat score during the Department of Ecology rating system. The entire wetland ecology's wetland rating system determine what category you are. So category first, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Then what's your habitat score? And then we have different bins for those. And then depending upon what use intensity you are, your buffer gets larger. And so utilizing that paradigm developed by ecology, you need to use these definitions. If we don't use that paradigm, there's 3 different options in that guidance, then you may not need to use this, but because this is the more specific guidance, Whatcom County has chosen to use this one because it's the most refined.
And so I'll ask I'm sorry, were you finished, Commissioner Desmani?
Well, no, yeah, I was finished. Thank you.
Ryan, could you add the word guidance to that list of definitions? I'd appreciate that.
Okay, so because guidance sometimes can mean rules as ecology sees it. And then there's the guidance ecology gives during the CAO update, which is true guidance because commerce is in charge of the GMA and the critical areas, whereas ecology is in charge of the SMP, and they're more restrictive. So I'll try.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish up with it. I just think it's kind of ridiculous to lump agriculture in with some of these pretty substantial development activities, commercial and urban. It seems like we should be promoting agriculture over pavement. So it doesn't make sense. It seems like agriculture to me should be in the medium, and then break that down between medium and low. But that's just my thoughts.
Well, I think Ryan and I somewhat agree with you, but this is a state definition, so Ryan's going to talk to the state wetland guy to
And you also have
see
organic
what leeway
farming,
we have.
maybe less impactful, because we had an issue by the airport where an organic farming wanted to go in. And because it's by the airport, there's all those the wetland complexes, right? Well, then we had to apply the high intensity land use when they weren't hardly touching the ground itself at all. And so
There's different variations of organic farming too, so I'd be careful with that one, and I'd probably argue with you a little bit as to how intensive it can be. But
true.
Right. Commissioner Desmani.
It's occurred to me that because the categories of use in agriculture can vary so much, that it may not be a good idea to assign an intensity number, because you can switch from one season to the next in a rotation. So I just wanted to bring that up, is that the concept of intensity may not be appropriate to use, particularly since it varies from year to year. I see fields which are changing use that's good agricultural practice, changing use every year for many types of cropping cycles.
Are there, not seeing any hands up, so if we want to move on to a different topic.
So just as a reminder, at your last meeting, you were going basically chapter by chapter in this thing and tentatively approving it. I know you still want to look at the flood section, but if you were to continue your previous practice, we'd start with 2340 and then 50 and 60.
Commissioners, I'm not trying to push, looks like a couple of people are deep in thought there, but do we want to, are we done with 23 for the night? Or are there other chapters in 23 people have questions about or comments? Would you like to move on to chapter 16? And this one, I don't have enough of you on the screen to be able to see a thumbs up or anything. Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
sorry, it's just a missing number, but I was reminded that you probably fixed that from the original, so never mind.
Well, maybe not. If you email it to me and I'll look at it. How's that?
Sounds good.
So just for the commissioners, normally I can see almost everybody. So if the thumbs up tonight doesn't work real well, just because we don't have the big screen. And unless someone has questions in 23, Cliff, why don't we go ahead and move on to 16? And
well, do you want to do what you did before and do a tentative approval motion on any of this, or?
I would, I think that could be appropriate, but there's 6 other commissioners on here that may have other thoughts, and right now I'm not seeing any hands up, so maybe they want to pause. Commissioner McClendon, go ahead.
Well, there are two things that staff shared with us earlier that are going to change 23. So, and frankly, I can't read them on, I need to look at them in the packet. So I don't see any point in taking the time to vote
Okay,
on it now. We'll look at them and vote on them at the next meeting. That's my suggestion.
All right, Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, will you be sending out an updated version with the increased language?
yeah, I'll send you out a new Title 23 with your next packet.
Okay. Can you highlight the changes that you made from the original so I don't have to read the whole thing?
Do what? I'm sorry?
Can you highlight the changes that you've made since basically from tonight?
So again, if you use the Word version and just search for note to PC, P/C, you'll find them all. And I've also tried to highlight in yellow, as you requested at the beginning, those changes.
Okay, so you'll send out a Word version, or is that going to be on the county website somewhere?
I think for this last meeting, we sent out a Word version. It was just as easy to have Tammy send that out to you. So
okay,
we'll do that again.
Sounds good.
Hey, Cliff, why don't you go ahead and take us over to 16?
Yep. Let me. Oops. Dismiss. 16. I'm just gonna find it. All right, and memo 5, we're gonna bring this up so I can. Okay, so like with the other documents, I outlined all the changes that Ryan and I made in your memo. I don't think that, I don't need to go through every single one of them. I'm more interested in hearing the issues that you have with some of these things. So I'm going to take my cues from you guys.
Right, Commissioner McClendon.
So on page 3 of the memo at the top, subsection D, it's a new policy that will allow for off-site mitigation when it's better for the environment. I read all that. I'm just wondering if you could give us an example so I can better understand what you're trying, what this means.
Right. So, and Ryan, jump in here if you feel a need. So under general mitigation requirements, it used to say that, your mitigation had to be on site. It could theoretically be off site, but it had to remain in the same basin. The county exec has asked us to start looking at a program to allow some off-site mitigation, at least for buffers. We don't want to do a mitigation bank, and that's what wetland banks wetland banks are for. But we don't know all the details because we've kind of thought through some of it, but we still have to do a public process to develop that program. But in setting up for the eventuality of that possibly happening, and for other reasons like getting a better mitigation out of something, we've set up this section C, which starts out by saying, though, on-site mitigation is preferred, if we could figure out something better, because you can't, say you have a single family house, small lot, and there's just no room on the lot to build a house and do your mitigation for wetland and everything. why can't it be slightly, somewhere off or somewhere else? Typically you want it in the same basin. But if the county is looking at buying some sites for buffer mitigation, that's all going to depend on what sites are available and which ones they end up buying. But we've set up this kind of tiered system of preference. So on-site and in-kind, which means on the same site that you've done the impacts. In-kind means do the same mitigation for what you've disturbed. Then second is off-site and in-kind. Third is on-site and out of kind. So on the same site, but maybe, instead of doing 50 square feet of wetland impacts, you do, 200 square feet of buffer. And then we also reiterate that you can use alternative mitigation plans. It is already a section in here, and mitigation bank credits from working with the Lummies. Ryan, you want to add anything more to that?
Yeah, it's a good.
Okay. Right, Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, same page 3 in your memo. You mentioned increasing the buffer widths from 150 feet to 200 feet. Is this required, or is this just based off of a recommendation?
So before I respond to that, I kind of want to make sure that I finished up with on the previous one. Did I satisfy commission on that response? Commissioner McClendon, you were the one that asked, so I just wanted to make sure.
Sorry, I missed some of it. My internet seems to be disabled. I mean, unstable.
Well,
I've been waiting to comment.
Commissioner Hanson, did you want to comment on the section that Cliff was talking about in answer to Commissioner?
Yes, I have my hand up there.
So, sure. Commissioner Hanson, hold just a second. So Commissioner Mayberry, I know you were ahead of Commissioner Hanson, but let's pause your question for a minute and let Commissioner Hanson then ask Cliff his question so that we stay on that same issue. Go ahead, Commissioner Hanson.
Well, when I read this proposed wording, I came up with an amendment to change it back to the way it was. And so I'm not very much in favor of out of basin mitigation. I understand we may be required to cooperate with mitigation banks that are set up under the state in this regard, but if we're not required to use out of basin mitigation, it doesn't make a lot of sense that we would. Let's say you have a site in the Bertrand Creek watershed and it's deemed that it's going to be inadequate low flows. So why would we want you to do mitigation wherever? It might be in some sub-basin where there are already adequate flows where it won't do any good. So I think that we should either restore the previous wording that required it to be in basin, or I'll come up with I had to have an amendment to change it back. As these basins some of these basins are pretty large, and there's a lot of opportunities for doing mitigation. And if it's a little tight with land for off-site, then maybe one of the 3 options for on-site or avoidance might be more appropriate.
So, Commissioner Masseri, go ahead.
Yeah, my understanding was, I guess, the flip flop of what Hanson said, or Commissioner Hanson said, because in some situations I thought that maybe the idea was maybe you're in a basin that's already doing better than another basin, and there's a better opportunity in another basin that you could improve. So I think sometimes it could also be a positive.
Okay, Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that under C2 here, it requires that the applicant demonstrate greater biological and or hydrological functions and values to be achieved. So in my view, I think that should satisfy Commissioner Hanson's concerns.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Ryan, did you want to address any of that? I saw your hand was up.
Commissioner Mayberry did a great job of saying exactly what I was going to point out. And I'd also like to further note too that in using this particular C2, you don't have, let's say you need to go offsite, you need to go into a different watershed, you may be required to do more mitigation than what's in the table to get your greater lift as well. So we may be actually, in some cases, be getting a greater amount of mitigation for that lift too. So.
Okay. So we had stopped for a moment for Commissioner Hanson to comment on Cliff's response to Commissioner McClendon. So we are back to Commissioner Mayberry. You had a point farther down on that list that I asked you to hold on for a minute. So go ahead.
Yeah, it's in your memo again, under subsection B, habitat conservation areas buffer widths. I'm going from 150 feet, proposing to increase it to 200 feet. Is that required, or is that a recommendation?
So you're talking about in the streams?
Yeah, our standard wetland buffer, remember we had to meet the DOE guidance that they didn't catch last time?
Correct, but Mayberry's question is actually under the HCA section.
The HCA section. Okay, sorry. Let me get to that. Is that here? There we go.
So this now lines up with the FEMA biological opinion that was issued in 2008 that was implemented in 10 and 12 here. That lines up with their guidance for buffer widths. Again,
required.
It is required. It is the standard now for those freshwater systems, and those would be the freshwater shoreline streams. So those are shorelines of the state. So basically the Nooksack and up a little bit into our tributaries, but then once it starts to go narrow back down again, they would go down to the type F streams once the flow gets below 20 CFS. So basically what it's trying to do is trying to protect Chinook. That's the 200 feet. That's what the FEMA got sued for not protecting endangered species, and the courts ruled that they did not do enough. And then this is the guidance from National Marine Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife for the buffer requirement to protect Chinook.
And this would impact development, correct?
Correct. It would impact development. And there are some ways to alleviate that through the variance process that we're trying to implement.
Okay. I don't want to get into it too far, but how did they come up with that extra 50 feet?
Well, it's 204 or something like that, isn't it really, Ryan?
Well, that's the Fish and Wildlife guidance on how to set stream widths based upon potential growth tree height of Douglas firs. But yeah, they 200 feet. It's interesting because the type S marine started out at 200 feet, and then it went down to 150 feet during the process of people saying, well, wait a minute, why is it 200 here when, and 150 over here, and they settled on this, and it's in their best available opinion, their best professional opinion on where it is and how it relates to protecting Chinook along these streams. It's a 200-page document I can pass out if people want to read it.
No, thanks.
Got there. It's supposed to be reasonable and prudent is what their determination was.
It just seems like some of these buffers are getting really, really large. 200 feet's a long ways.
Yeah.
And later in here, we're going to be talking about 300 feet, which I don't know. I don't understand.
Is that on the wetlands ones?
Yeah.
We might as well talk about those now. Ryan, you want to do that?
In 2017, I think it was, Ecology came out with an update to these numbers, as well as historically, we didn't change any buffers in our last round of a 2017 update, any wetland buffers. And so Ecology missed it. And we were supposed to update to larger buffers at that particular point in time, and we didn't do it. And so now we're playing catch up on that. And then Ecology has changed the way that they bin the habitat score. And I don't know if everybody here was on the council at that time, but Ed and Liliana Miller Environmental, as well as NES and Katrina Jackson submitted some data and some comments on changing this. And at the time, because we were allowed to at that time, they considered both the BAS we adopted our own CO under and this new BAS as BAS. And now this is the BAS, is to make it the best available science is what you see here. And we're supposed to update to this.
Yeah, I think most of the commissioners remember we brought this to you 2 years ago or something when some of the local consultants and the BIAW, they saw that these numbers here had changed, this habitat function score, and they wanted us to move to them, thinking it would be better, not realizing that it also came along with, in some cases higher, in some cases lower buffers, but things fall differently. And so we went through a process with the consultants where they took a bunch of their actual projects and gathered all the data, and we did an analysis. Well, they and us did an analysis, and we couldn't really tell if there was an overall benefit or harm to development. I mean, it seemed in general the buffers on the wetlands and agricultural fields would probably get smaller, and the better wetlands on the upland part where we see more of the housing development would get bigger. But we couldn't come up with a definitive, this will harm people by this much or help people by this much.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I don't think it has a functional impact, but category 1 goes from, on the habitat score, category 4, sorry, on the habitat function score goes from 9 to 3. All the other ones go from the lower on the left to the higher score on the right. So I don't know if that makes any reason to change that or not.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Oh, I see what you mean. The numbers are kind of reversed.
Yeah, it's just a small thing.
All right, I'll change
I
that.
was just curious where in the county you mean by saying that they'd be more impacted. I'm talking kind of out east, south or north of Bellingham, those areas?
Well, we didn't really do a geographic analysis, but it was basically, the better wetlands, more important ones tend to be not in your agricultural fields, but in more of the upland areas. And so those are increasing like a category 8 to 9, which you don't have too many of really. They're increasing substantially. 6 to 7 is actually put, some of these other wetlands into this category, but they stayed the same. These went down. I couldn't really tell you geographically where that would be. It was just my impression from looking at this data and talking to the consultants that in general, it seems like it would be, you know, the farmers would somewhat win and the subdividers might somewhat lose.
We're supposed to be exempt anyway, right? As long as we're ongoing.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And you said there's maps available, but they're not supposed to be used as actual. These are the
maps of
maps of where these wetland categories are.
Yeah, Whatcom County does not have a definitive wetland map of all of the wetlands. So that's why we have people like Ed, if he's still on the call, who go out there and do site-specific analysis. And so that's unfortunate that we have that screening tool, but it typically we have to do one. And Ed sees more of these than we do because he gets phone calls and we never see the project. So.
Yeah, speaking of that, I was wondering if we could get him to talk about the impacts of the changes of this table.
Are you asking for him to come on and answer that?
Yes, if he's
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yes, if he's willing.
Yes. Mr. Miller, are you willing to, as Commissioner Mayberry has requested, come on and talk a little bit about this? And I believe it is *9 for you to be able to speak. I don't know if he is able to do that, but if he comes on, we'll ask that question. Go ahead, Mr. Miller. And
yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Can the commissioner repeat the question? I'm not sure I caught it.
Yeah, I was just wondering how impactful the change in the wetland category, land use intensity, standard wetland buffer width change in that table is going to be for development in the county.
Yeah, well, it's never clear, and I know we spoke about this at some meetings a year or so ago. Some buffers will get smaller, which will be very helpful where ecology changed the habitat score break. The big change, and we discussed this a little bit again in those prior meetings, where potentially some category 3 wetlands, if they have a high habitat score, will have huge buffers. And that's not, it's not always the case that the highest category wetlands are the undisturbed ones. Actually, the way the rating form works, they give more value to wetlands that are potentially near disturbed areas because they have the potential to clean water. So often I find that wetlands that are actually in or near ag might score higher because they're cleaning that water, as opposed to a wetland that's in the middle of the woods might score lower. So as I mentioned again in the past, you could have a category 3 wetland that's partly in a farm field and it goes off into the woods a little bit on the side. It actually wouldn't be very hard. And I've seen it happen many times. So it wouldn't happen a whole lot, but we would start to see those happening where, and again, it just based on where you are in the county sometimes, the way these things work, where the rating form works, if you're within 300 feet of a stream or some logs, then all of a sudden the habitat score is higher, and then all of a sudden you have a 225-foot buffer, which is significant. I'm not sure if that sort of speaks to your question.
Yeah, I guess my main question was how big of an issue is this? Are there, I guess, other areas that you see as more impactful?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's hard to, I think some buffers will get smaller and some buffers will get much larger. And it's hard to gauge exactly, you know, how impactful that will be. It's just some people will be very unlucky with, and it's not, again, you can't characterize it. The undisturbed wetlands up in the mountains are going to have the highest buffers. They could easily happen down in the county around ag and farm areas as well. But it's hard to predict where. I think it definitely, this is being pushed by ecology to some degree, as Ryan has said before. So that is, might be difficult to change. But again, yeah, it just depends on where you are in the county. That's about all I could say about it, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Commissioner Mayberry.
All right, I got a question on page 4 of the memo under habitat. Consider strengthening ecological connectivity and wildlife corridor requirements, and it looks like it's kind of scattered throughout. Just wanted someone to explain what that means. Are we going to create a whole new set of buffers based on animal traffic going from one pond to the next?
Well, I'll start, and Ryan, you can add anything if you want. And short answer is no. The council's never adopted a wildlife habitat corridor other than the Chuckanut Wildlife Habitat Corridor, which encompasses most of the mountains there. So apart from that, we don't have any rules per se about, you know, what you have to do if you have a corridor. However, when it's clear that animals traverse between two different areas, our natural resources folks kind of take that into consideration, and the consultants. And from here, I'm going to let Ryan take it because he's the guy that implements these things.
So the Wildlife Advisory Committee that was commissioned by council is looking at the habitat connectivity and making a recommendation to council. So we'll have a better idea of what this is, but we've had a number of folks asking for this. The GMA requires us to look at habitat.
Can you pause a minute there, Ryan? We lost you. You want to try again now, see if we got you back.
It sounds like your mic's bad.
How about now?
It's not coming through very well.
Well, I can add a little bit more about what Ryan told me when I asked about this as well. And that is, so say you're, you know, there's a couple of wetlands on site or one next door or something, and somebody has to do some buffer impact mitigation for buffer impacts. He said what they do in reviewing these things and trying to figure out where the mitigation should go and what areas to, you know, not make smaller are those areas between these kind of like the wetlands or a wetland and a habitat conservation area. So we do try to, you know, if there's the possibility, and especially if there's clear indications that there is movement between, say, two pockets of critical areas, then we try to do the mitigation in those areas and try to protect those areas much more than, you know, say something where a house might want to be.
So who comes up with where these wildlife corridors?
Well, they're not corridors per se. If we have a wildlife corridor, that's something that, at least from our point of view, that's something for council to act on and declare a wildlife corridor. But there may be connectivity areas between different critical areas or different portions of wetlands or different wetlands, for example, that then the consultant who's working on the project for the property owner would identify whether there are some or aren't. And then we try to do the best protection and improvement around those areas.
Right. Commissioner Hanson.
So if you had a pond on either side of the road, would you put a sign up that says beaver crossing?
No, it's just like out here in Northwest, all these people have wildlife corridor signs up, about deer, and it's not a wildlife corridor. They're claiming it is, but although they're having great success with tunnels and overpasses now in Colorado and California.
I have some of those signs. Were you talking about me?
I don't know. Do you live on Northwest?
No. Commissioner McClendon. Commissioner
So
McClendon,
I'm having
there you
a real
go.
hard time. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can right now, yes.
Can you hear me at all? Okay.
Yes, we can.
I want to get my question in real quick because I'm barely connected. On page 76, this is middle of the memo, page 3, 1616 680. You've got the chart, and of course I don't have my book open to that.
The compensatory
Page
mitigation.
676. Yeah, it seems to me a chart like this needs a legend. Is it clear that the first half of the ratio is one thing and the second half is another? It doesn't say what's what. It just says ratio. There's 1.5 to 1 or 3 to 1. It seems to me it needs to say what the first number is and what the second number is.
Well, what
you
it,
hear
what
me?
it is how much mitigation you have to do for how much area you've disturbed. So 1.5.
I
acres.
understand that.
Okay, I get your question,
I
and
understand.
yes, I think the people in the know
Yeah,
what it is,
just-
but the people not in the know don't. So I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Commissioner Desmani.
My question is about the corridor issue.
Hang on 1 second while I finish up making a note of the previous comment.
Certainly.
Okay, go for it.
Where are the places where wildlife corridor are defined, and who has the authority to define a wildlife corridor?
The council. And it would be done under, let me get to the place. If you remember, there was a lot of discussion about species and habitats of local importance. And so that's where it would fall under if the council were to choose one. At this point, all we have is identified on our critical areas map is the Chuckanut Wildlife Corridor, which is identified here.
Thank
Oh, yep. So I believe the Wildlife Advisory Committee, at least they have it on their work plan to study these and maybe come up with some recommendations for council. And if council then adopts those, we'd add those to this list.
Commissioner Mayberry. Sorry, Commissioner Mayberry, we hold for a moment. Ryan, did you have a little more to add there?
Did he come back?
Well, his hand went up, but I,
Oh, there it is. Okay. I was just about to text him to make sure he was okay.
Ryan, are you able to talk with us? I don't believe he is. Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask the same question that Commissioner Grismani asked about ecological connectivity. Who makes that determination?
So a corridor is different from connectivity, and whether there's connectivity between two areas would be determined by the wetland or biological consultant and staff. They'd hash that out.
And what's the guidelines for determining that?
There are none.
I assume it's based on biological principles.
Well, that's my concern, is that this grass area is wet and it looks like it kind of goes towards this other wet area, therefore connected, and creating a whole new pile of buffers in that area.
I don't think it's creating any new buffers. All these sections really say is take into account whether there might be ecological connectivity between areas when looking, designing your project and mitigation. The idea being, animals do migrate. They have different needs between, different portions of their life cycle. And if we cut them all off, then they all go extinct around here. So I think that's,
What
argument for them.
What specific animals are we talking about? I'm assuming not birds, because hopefully most of them can fly. But what needs the highways between wet areas?
Well, most often around here, it seems to be amphibians and things like raccoons, and those are trash animals for the most part, but beavers, things like that. I'm not the county's biologist, so I can't answer that very well. But
I was just gonna say I'm not a biologist either, but the frogs around my place seem to have no problem crossing the road. Every once in a while, one of them has bad luck, but.
Are you out there playing Frogger?
So let's try Ryan again. Do we have you back, Ryan?
Can you hear me now?
We cannot hear you. It's too faint to be able to make out what you're saying.
That is weird.
Oh,
Now
I
it's a
heard him
little
there.
louder.
Now I can hear you.
You can hear me now.
Yes.
Yeah, speak quickly.
Okay. Can you navigate to the section of code where we're having an issue? Because I don't see it on the screen.
Oh, he was asking about from the memo. We pointed out where, when council said consider strengthening ecological connectivity on wildlife corridor requirements. And I pointed out where we've added language to that effect, mostly, in the general mitigation and the reports, having consultants talk about whether there might be connectivity between two different wetlands or something like that, and how you guys try to protect those areas, and if there's going to be any mitigation, that's perhaps where you would direct it, to go. And then he also asked what types of animals are moving back and forth between these various areas.
Okay, so in the wetland buffer modification section, ecology's guidance is that when you reduce buffer, you should look at connectivity between wetlands within the landscape and protect those. When you're doing that or averaging them, you should average them such that you maintain those corridors between those habitat types. That's ecology's guidance for wetlands, and that's why that's there. But in general, most of our connectivity that's left in Whatcom County is along streams themselves, and because we've fragmented the forests, and a bunch of different species utilize the corridors. But that's one of the things that makes it difficult with a wildlife advisory committee supposed to be working on is, what are you looking to manage? Are you looking to manage large game? That's a much wider wildlife corridor than if you're managing it for a much smaller species. So it's very variable. But they're supposed to be coming out with that guidance here sometime soon. They've been working on it for a couple of years. So this regulation itself comes out of Skagit County, and they've been using it for quite some time down there.
So in the meantime, without the guidance as to how to determine connectivity, we're just gonna just do it as a case by case.
Yeah, and that I can honestly say that, and I think Ed's still on the line, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the director has never increased a wetland buffer in Whatcom County. And our current code allows us to do this. So.
Okay.
Cliff, why don't you go ahead and continue?
Well, again, that was up to you guys. You were people were asking questions about particular things they were concerned about.
Okay, Commissioner Mosseri.
Yeah, I got a question on 265.
1616, 265,
Yeah, sorry. It's gonna take me a second.
protective measures. Okay.
Yeah, I had a question about the reasoning for shrinking the reasonable use size from 4,000 to 2,500. Because it sounded like that was just implemented, or the 4,000 was just implemented in 2017 potentially.
So this is a much larger discussion. So do you want to jump into the whole buffer modification scheme that's being proposed?
I think that now would be a good time in my mind, but it's up to the commission.
I think Commissioner Mayberry has a question here. Maybe before we move, Commissioner Mayberry, what Commissioner Mosseri is asked about going to building setbacks, and I know you had one more question. Would that relate to building setbacks, or should we finish that question up?
No, sorry, I think I pushed the wrong button. Raise my hand.
Okay, then let's go ahead into building setbacks.
Go ahead and start, Ryan. I'll try to point us where you are and I'll add in anything.
Okay, so reasonable use exception is a process whereas we're trying to avoid a regulatory taking. It is a process where you can, through a variance, through the hearing examiner, because the reasonable use exception is a type of variance, as is proposed or has been proposed through state legislation and state guidance documents, not Whatcom County, but I'm talking about the state in general. And so it is a last-ditch effort to avoid a regulatory taking. In Whatcom County, we have used it as the easy off-ramp for avoiding on lots that are fully encumbered by critical areas and their buffers. And so what we've done here is we said, okay, administratively, if we can't reduce it and average it, instead of sending you to the hearing examiner, we're going to allow you to basically vary the buffer standards in exchange for a smaller building footprint or a set building footprint. This makes the planners themselves have to determine if setting a house right on the edge of a wetland or a stream is appropriate. Our code says you just put it there. That's where it goes. Wherever you can put it in the lot, that's where it goes. But you have to fully mitigate for those impacts. So what that does is it creates a situation where if somebody might not be able to, they have a fully forested lot with a wetland and a stream, and they get their 4,000 square feet, but they can't fully mitigate on site for it. So then they got to go off-site, either purchase easement for mitigation off-site, or they have to go to a bank, or they have to purchase a property and then extinguish that development right, which isn't really reasonable in the sense of a exception to avoid a regulatory taking. It's actually quite onerous on it. So most of the west of Washington areas that I have worked in has a different approach to reasonable use, and following this schema, you get to reasonable use, but it's through a hearing examiner. And the hearing examiner decides, okay, we're going to vary all our codes to give you something in exchange for a smaller building footprint. So the way that we would do it now is that first you'd start with averaging. And if you could average the buffer by 25% and get your use you're after, let's say you want a 4,000 square foot home and 3,000 square foot shop. So you want 7,000 square feet of development. If you can get that through a 25% averaging, great, we're done, we walk away, we do some, call it good, and we move on. If we do a 20% reduction, you got to do some plantings. Great, here's some plantings, we move on. I know I'm simplifying this, and so bear with me. And then we're adding an administrative variance criteria, where administratively we can vary the buffer by 25 to 50% in order to get you that home. So if the homes around you are enjoying a 4,000 square foot house and a 3,000 square foot shop, then great. If they're enjoying a 3,000 square foot home and a 4,000 square foot shop, well, then great too. We can work with that. But administratively, we can reduce it down to 25 to 20% of what your neighbors could enjoy. Then after 25 to 50%, then we start going to the hearing examiner. And the hearing examiner says, okay, it makes sense. We're going to vary you down to 0%. Now you have to, take into considerations some other things going into it. But if you can't get that what your neighbors are enjoying and can fully mitigate, all those 3 steps require full mitigation. If you can't do that, then you're in this point where I can't mitigate on site. I can't afford to go buy something off site. You're taking my property. So the hearing examiner then can decide, great, we'll mitigate the best we can on site in exchange for a 2,500 square foot building footprint, which goes back to what we used to have prior to the 4,000 square feet. Now, so that's a job of a hearing examiner, is to make those tough decisions. That's not the job of a planner. The planner should not be making those decisions. That's a hearing examiner's job. That's why we hire them. That's why we have the quasi-judicial process, making sure that's all fair and reasonable. Now, on the 2,500 square feet, the reason why we went to 4,000 is that we have these, as Ed had said, these really large buffers. And so we may have a wetland that's in a corner of a lot, and then the rest of the lot's all buffer. Well, it doesn't make much sense to limit that person to 2,500 square feet. So the idea was, on these larger lots that were encumbered fully by buffers, we'd give them 4,000 square feet, which made more sense. But what has happened is that the way that it's been used is that we automatically, we jump straight to 4,000 square feet for every reasonable use case, which doesn't always make sense. Sometimes you want a smaller buffer, a smaller footprint to alleviate it. And so in this schema, we're hoping that we would be able to get people the projects they actually want with a little bit extra effort, but instead of limiting them to 4,000 square feet, and then using the reasonable use the way that it was intended through the Growth Management Act, which was to avoid a regulatory taking.
Okay, Commissioner McClendon.
Where is the? Hold on.
Are you doing a TikTok video?
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
No. Oh, you can? Okay.
Yes.
Where is this in our document? I couldn't find it at all.
It is.
It wasn't referenced in the.
It's in several places.
And as Cliff navigates, I should also mention that our hearing examiner, when he read the new updated CAO in 2017, he noticed that the reasonable use says that all other avenues to alleviate the hardship has been taken care of, is how it doesn't read word for word for that, but that's what it says. It says all other measures have been satisfied or identified. That would mean a variance. So technically,
Ryan,
before we even applied a reasonable use, we should have gone through a variance process. Which,
Ryan, can you pause just for a moment?
Yeah.
I think what happened is we lost you and didn't realize you were still talking, and Commissioner McClendon has asked a question. So we missed part of your response. And go ahead, Cliff. If you can clarify, that would be great.
Well, I could hear Ryan just now, so I don't know.
I could, but I think he was continuing from prior. I did.
All right. Anyways, Commissioner McClendon asked where these are found. And so it's 1616-270 describes the reasonable use exceptions. 1616-273 describes the variances. And if you recall, in our code scrub that we did this last year, we introduced the notion, and you recommended to council, and council approved this notion of minor variances and major variances, or minor variances are administratively granted, though using the same criteria. So we've pointed that out up here as well. And yeah, that's where they're found.
Commissioner McClendon, does that answer your question? And I believe we may have lost.
I assume so. I will go look at them.
I just want to make sure if you had a comment that we
Yeah.
could still hear you, so. Okay. And Ryan, did you have any more to say?
I was just saying that another reason why we've gone this route is because the way our current code is written, if Whatcom County applied it as written, which we don't because it doesn't make sense how it's written, it basically says that before we can do an administrative approval, you have to go to the hearing examiner and get denied a variance. And legally, that's not the right way to do it, because once you go to the hearing examiner, we should not touch it again. He's the highest authority on land use from this standpoint of Whatcom County. And so he pointed that out, saying this is ridiculous for them to come and I deny something and then you approve it. It doesn't make sense. And so we've just been processing them as usual, where we can kind of go straight to the reasonable use without having to do the variance process. And we do variances for people who want them because they want to get more development on their site.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I was just curious, legally, what determines reasonable use? I noticed that we added some requirements, or kind of changed the definition of what the county considers reasonable use. And you could argue that going from 4,000 to 2,500 square feet is a change in what reasonable use is. What is the threshold that a property owner can argue what reasonable use is? Because in a sense that is taking value away from their property.
So as Ryan pointed out, there are 4 steps before you get there up to that point. So you first try to avail yourself of this administrative reduction or averaging of buffers to try to fit your project on. If that doesn't work, then you can move to an administrative variance where we can reduce buffers up to 50%. Again, they have to be mitigated and you have to meet variance criteria. If that doesn't work, then we move on to go to the hearing examiner, who has the authority then to grant a variance from any dimensional standards in the code. And if that can't be met, but you still have to meet the variance criteria and mitigate the impacts. And again, so if you're on a lot that's so constrained that you can only get, a small little house and you have to impact wetlands, that's when the reasonable use thing kicks in. So that is supposed to be the highest, the most impactful, and that's why it should be going to the hearing examiner rather than staff for making those decisions.
Right. My question is more along the lines of, is 2,500 square feet reasonable? And is there a way for the homeowner to challenge what we're proposing here? Because there's a difference in value between a 4,000 square foot.
So the 2,500 square foot number was the number in the reasonable use from like 1996 up through 2017. And at that point, Ryan, you suggested we move it to the 4,000, but I don't recall why.
We did it because it didn't make sense to me to limit somebody who was only impacting the buffer and still had plenty of buffer between them and the wetland to make them only get 2,500 square feet of development. It didn't make sense.
In any case, you know, so that we don't get into a takings case, we have to allow somebody who has a property that it may be completely submerged in a wetland. We have to allow them to do what's reasonable use. In Whatcom County, the council has determined that that's basically building a standard house, and a standard house is generally around 2,500 square feet. I think we argued last time it went up, there was, for some reason, again, Ryan just explained, but there was a reason we went to 4,000, but then just, or whatever the number is. And then now that we're getting back to the reasonable use being kind of the last ditch effort to give somebody reasonable use of their property, we're proposing to go back down. Now, if you read any of the court cases on reasonable uses, it's still pretty generous, because in many cases, the courts say, you know, you can get a little cabin, you can get a 700-foot square house, you can do recreation on your property, and therefore, you know, that's a reasonable use for you. But our council has made the policy decision that getting a typical single-family house on a piece of property is a reasonable use. So we're just trying to limit the amount of impacts to the minimum possible and still get somebody a single-family house on their property.
I mean,
So, I mean, if you want something bigger, you still have all these abilities here, or, you know, to get a different property.
Right. We're also increasing buffers, which is going to shrink that area down. So the other issue I have is the definition of what that square footage applies to. So it's not just the house, it's in garages, shops, I understand, but lawn and non-native landscaping, that adds up fast.
It does, but if you're so constrained, say you're, you know, it's 100% constrained by wetlands, other people might argue that that's too much because you're completely filling that much area. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, and so the bullet point above that, through the hearing examiner variance, you could ask for a 0 buffer off the wetland, and 7,000, you know, and if your neighbors have a large house and a shop and lawn space, the variance criteria says that you can't get something that your neighbors don't enjoy. So you look at the neighborhood and is what is reasonable or what is typical of your neighborhood is what you get through a variance process. The hearing examiner can vary you down to 0 through the process from that wetland and give you that location. The trade-off is that for bullet point 3 is you have to fully mitigate for all those impacts. And when you get to the bullet point 4 is you may not be getting 100% mitigation off of that site because you can't do it. And so therefore you're getting a smaller footprint, which would help you reach that ability to get the full mitigation on site.
Right. Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I was curious, what's the average reasonable use size among, let's say, just even Western Washington counties, because, you know, it's a different environment on the west side versus the east side, because it's weird that it's so subjective. You know, 4,000 to somebody seems like a ton and doesn't seem like very much. 2,500 seems like plenty for some and nothing at all. So it's feeling a little subjective. So I want to get something to compare to.
I think a lot of jurisdictions don't have a number in there as what's a reasonable use. It's left up to, you know, judgment at the time when the permit comes in. Like I said, I've seen a lot of the court cases where they go up to the Supreme Court on a, you know, say it's a neighborhood on the beach and one of those little spits of sand or something. And they said, you know, the neighbors might have bigger homes, but no, you can get a 700 square foot cabin on there, or you can park your RV down there, and that's a reasonable use for that property. So it does vary amongst jurisdictions. And I think we're one of the few that actually kind of put into code that what that means in terms of how much impact you can do.
The Department of Ecology and the council, when we updated the SMP back in 2005, determined that 2,500 square feet plus 500 square feet for lawn, so 3,000 technically, but that's not how it's written, but it's how we apply it. Say that that was reasonable for avoiding a shoreline variance process on these small encumbered lots that we have on Lake Whatcom and in the Salt Springs area, Sandy Point. And so that was determined to be reasonable at that time through the state agencies and our council. For instance, on Bainbridge Island, the hearing examiner ruled that 1,400 square feet for the house was reasonable, and then we didn't account the garage or account the driveway. The way that this reads, I believe it still reads that way, is that the 2,500 square feet does not include long driveways. Extended driveways, at least when I was the manager, their supervisor there, was anything over 150 feet long was considered an extended driveway, because at that point you got to put in fire truck turnarounds and things like that. You eat up 2,500 or 4,000 square feet even really quickly. And so that number is not BAS in any way, not physical bill of science. It is determined by basically our council has made that its threshold, as well as Department of Ecology for the shoreline environment.
But we're not going along with the recommendation of the council or the Department of Ecology. We're not going to have the 500 square foot of lawn with the way this reads.
So the way that our code is actually written is that it says that you get 2,500 square feet, and that includes ornamental landscaping. And then another section says that you get up to 500 square feet of lawn or 10% of the outer buffer, whichever is greater. It also said that you're supposed to mitigate fully impacts for the buffer itself. And that wasn't always implemented until recently on it. And that was kind of a change in policy and direction with the department. But it is supposed to be inclusive of your lawn, but we haven't applied it that way. We've applied 500 square feet outside of the 2,500 square feet.
Just to make sure I'm understanding though, but originally the council had recommended 2,500 plus the 5,000 of lawn, or the 500 of lawn?
Now, council recommended 2,500 square feet, which includes all of your ornamental landscaping. Within your outer buffer, you're allowed up to 500 square feet of lawn. Way that was implemented was that you got 2,500 square feet plus 500 square feet. And nobody challenges you when you're in favor of the applicant. And so that is how it's been applied. If we want to add, if you want to make it bigger, that's fine. This is just going back to what in the critical areas it was prior to my recommending us for lots with only buffer impacts, large lots could go up to 4,000 square feet. I'm recommending if we go backwards, you guys can always raise it again, but I'm just recommending we go back to what it was prior to the change of the code in 2017.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I guess it would make sense to me that there would be a larger available space if it was just buffer impacts. Is that how this reads, or does it not matter whether it's plopped in a wetland versus a buffer?
Right. So you got to remember that. So this is basically building in an avoidance criteria. If you call Skagit County up and talk to them about it, nobody ever reaches reasonable use in Skagit County. I mean, you basically have to get denied a hearing examiner variance where the buffer can go down to 0. You could ask for a 7. My neighbor has a 4,000 square foot house and a 2,000 square foot garage, and everybody else in my neighborhood has that size of a house. So I should get 6,000 square feet of development. And then you go to the front of the hearing examiner and say, I'm going to have to reduce my buffer here and here and here and here to get 6,000 square feet. And I'm mitigating for my impacts fully. Give me my 6,000 square feet. Like the idea is that you don't go past bullet point number 3. It's a very rare case that you get to bullet point 4. as opposed, it should be an exception instead of the rule.
Yeah, I guess if Natalie has a question, that's great. But after that, I was just wondering if Ed could comment on potential that he sees with this.
Okay. Commissioner McClendon, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. This is torturous. I just texted you my question, but I'll give it to you verbally. I'm curious about this reasonable use exception, and that it looks at the neighborhood and determine what's reasonable. What if all the property around there is non-conforming? Wouldn't that just extend the non-conforming use to more properties?
So yeah, and just for the nomenclature, that what you're talking about is actually the hearing examiner variance process and not the reasonable use process. The hearing examiner variance would look at the neighborhood.
Can you say that again?
So the hearing examiner variance, so if you give a clip, if you can bring up the variance criteria so people can
Sure. They're found in 22, so give me
Yeah.
a second. 22.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. I didn't get that, but I just wanted to make that point.
There's the criteria for a variance.
But my question on the non-conforming part is that in Whatcom County, all we have is lot coverage. So people would have to be over 20% lot coverage or 25 in the rural areas and greater than 5,000 square feet, unlike Lake Whatcom in those areas. Is that what you're, because just because you're close to a wetland doesn't bring this into, it is if people can enjoy their properties. So you have to meet those criteria. That's the shoreline variance criteria.
I'm sorry, I'm not following this. I'll let it pass for now.
Yeah, so like for non-conforming per se, like we're not, through the reasonable use process, you can vary zoning because you're at the hearing examiner. But typically this looks at structures and their square footages that your neighbors are enjoying, not necessarily non-conforming to front yard setbacks or side setbacks or rear setbacks. So that's why I was asking what non-conforming to. Our lot
Okay, thank you.
just watertight roofs is mostly 20%.
Okay.
So your variance process is typically, it can't be just because of pecuniary, of financial reasons. You can't get something that your neighbors can't enjoy themselves without, and you, what's the last one, Cliff?
On the criteria?
Yeah.
Oh, shit, I just had it up. Hang on one second. So it's these criteria right here.
Yeah. So that would be if it was in the shoreline, and then if it was not in the shoreline, there's a different set of variance criteria.
Though they're quite similar.
But they're quite similar. Now, if you can't meet this criteria, then you would get kicked into reasonable use. And then that would be limiting your square footage.
So Commissioner Mayberry, do you want to pick up where you were before?
Yeah, I just wanted to let Ed have the opportunity to comment on how the change of the reasonable use process.
Are you asking for Mr. Miller to address this?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, would you go ahead and answer the question as requested by Commissioner Mayberry?
Sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. In general, and I can see where Ryan's going, and trying to move a lot of the heavy lifting away from staff, I think, and that responsibility, and push it toward the hearing examiner. I don't understand all of the guys of it, but just from a practical standpoint, you know, from where I am interacting with clients all the time, there's a couple things, I guess, of note that I would say. One is that the step 1 and 2 would not happen often. Of all of the reasonable use we've done, all of them would result in more than 50% buffer. It's pretty rare, and especially with buffers getting larger. I mean, a lot of times when you get small lots, and now we have buffers hundreds of feet wide, that you're going to be in that scenario. The other thing that I think might be a little more concerning, you know, I can see going to the hearing examiner, but what's going to happen is you're going to sort of lose all predictability with the process. So right now, when there's a set number of people, whether they're buying property or selling property or looking at building, they have a general idea of what they can. So if it's all changed and it goes to variance, until you get hearing exam, what you're going to be allowed to. And I know people, but look around, and the hearing examiner is going to it's going to what the hearing examiner thinks, what's on, you know, if the neighbors are in support of the development of that lot or not, because it's a public process, anybody can come and comment. And often I've been there many times where people don't want the neighboring lot developed, so they do whatever they can to oppose it. And the hearing examiner takes that into consideration, it seems like. So that would be difficult for me as a partner. I wouldn't know to tell people, as far as I would have no idea what they would be allowed to build. And then, yeah, just in general, you know, getting the last bullet, reducing back to 2,500, again, that can be pretty small on a large property. So, yeah, that doesn't account for much, really. So, I mean, and again, with buffers getting larger, that won't give you a lot. I think that's kind of the main things I'm seeing right now.
Though, as Ryan pointed out, you can get bigger things through this stuff here. This is just supposed to be the last resort.
Right, but again, on the third bullet, the hearing examiner, I think my point is, it's hard to predict. So no one's going to know. Like if we can tell, we can do a reconnaissance on a property and tell someone, yeah, there's wetlands and buffers there, but we can't tell them how big of a house they could build. And so there's no way to know or even value their property, because they can't go through that process. Right now, if we know we can get, you know, before 2,500 square feet of 4,000, that's a box we could put on there. But so if this changes, we really won't have any idea, right? I guess that's my point there.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Just going back to this 2,500 square feet, I just personally think that that's too constrictive when it includes everything that it does. So I'd like to make a motion to increase that back up to the original 4,000 square feet. So I move to strike 2,500 square feet on 16.16.270 C item 12 and change that to 4,000.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion from commissioners? And it's to change. I can't see all of it, so I can't read it.
Oh,
Tammy,
let me move it back.
Can you?
Right.
Oh, I have the participant list covers part of the screen, so I can't see everything. And Tammy, are you able to restate the motion for me?
Commissioner Mayberry moved to increase from 2,500 square feet to 4,000 square feet, the language in 16-16-270, and I believe it was C12?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner McClendon, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to vote on this. If you want support, you might want to postpone it. I'm just so distracted with my connectivity issues. I have only been able to follow this conversation, and it is kind of complicated, so I think I need to think about it.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, originally, I was really concerned with this whole section as far as recourse for property owners, and the change in it. I think staff has convinced me, hopefully correctly, that this may be a better process for both staff as well as the intention of how to get to the reasonable use. And that if I understand correctly, what I'm proposing to be 4,000 square feet, that's the backstop at reasonable use for a buildable lot. Is that correct?
That's what it sounds like to me, yes.
And so that will be the amount. Our consultants will go straight to 4,000 square feet. And this would also apply to direct wetland fill. So you could direct wetland fill up to 4,000 square feet without mitigation.
That's not true. Not true.
Yeah, Ed, you may have to get it from the Corps. The Corps may require you to do mitigation, but the way that this is set up is that it's so that if you can't fully mitigate on site, you don't have to. From Whatcom County standpoint, through the GMA, you'll be off the hook for mitigation. That's the way this is set up. That's all. That's why it was 2,500 square feet. The Corps may require you to mitigate, and that's true. But from the GMA, you would not be able to do that. You would not have to mitigate.
Okay, so I guess that's my point. If we're going to set a backstop for reasonable use for impacted area, with the fact that it includes garages, shops, decks, parking, lawn, and non-native landscaping, I think that's a reasonable minimum. Anything less than that, when you're including lawns and landscaping, we are really talking about a cabin where someone may have planned on building a residence. So that's my reasoning for increasing it back to the 4,000.
Okay.
Commissioner Desmani.
Sorry, for me, I'm inclined to abstain on this particular item. I'm not feeling for or against it, just to give guidance to the people proposing it.
And Commissioner McClendon, I know you spoke and then your hand is either didn't go down or you put it back up, but go ahead.
Yeah, I have another. Okay. I just want to remind people this purpose of this this code is to protect shorelines. And frankly, if people want to build a house on a shoreline which falls under the Shoreline Management Program laws, they don't need a lawn, they don't need non-native landscaping. They need to recognize that this is not about protecting the ecological function of the shoreline and adjacent wetlands, etc. So I'm not concerned about people stuck building a cabin. Maybe they need to adjust their expectations. Sorry, I have a bad attitude about that, I guess.
Commissioner Hanson.
Well, I tend to agree with Commissioner McClendon, is that in that despite our pledge for no net loss, we probably are having accelerating loss of ecological functions. And we're not just talking about the welfare of individual property owners here. We're talking about the future of our children and grandchildren. So if there's a basic expectation that if you make impacts, you mitigate those impacts to get closer to no net loss, it would seem silly to have a loophole to let people off the hook and let them build a reasonable sized development with on impacted areas with no mitigations. Just doesn't make any sense to me.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I just want to clarify, we're not just talking about shorelines here, correct? We're talking about all critical areas, which include
Thank you.
inland wetlands. So it could be the little wet area in your backyard that we're talking about, which is of larger concern to me than someone trying to build right next to a stream.
Okay. Right. Anybody else like to speak to the motion? Okay. Tammy, would you please call the roll on this, or does anyone else need it read out again? Tammy, would you call the roll?
Certainly. Commissioner Desmonte,
Abstain?
Commissioner Hanson,
Sorry, I was muted there.
okay, taking roll call as a vote.
No.
Thank you. Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
No.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Passes 4, 2 noes, and 1 abstaining.
Okay. Commissioner Masseri.
I have just a small comment on the variance section. I think it's 265. Oh, no, sorry, I apologize. I wrote that down wrong. Can you remind me where it talks about the different variant sizes?
273. It's on the screen there.
Okay, yeah, where it mentions the minor variance, it says that there are 2 types of variances: a minor variance, which is limited to 25 to 50%, and then the major. Concerning this area, that's true, the minor variance is the 25 to the 50, but there is those other 2 minor variances mentioned in the Title 22. So just reading that, I think someone could assume that this is the only minor variance. I thought a reword of that may be useful.
How's that? So 2 types of variances pertaining to this chapter.
Okay. Thank you, Cliff.
Yep.
Okay. Commissioner Mayberry.
I had a question on, sorry, 16.16.230B. I'm just wondering what's the purpose of the removal of and planting, and then why are we excluding trees?
So maintenance. So this is supposed to be an exception to having to get any kind of permit or review or anything, that you don't even have to notify us. It's being able to, say you're an existing house before these rules came into play. And so you have a garden in what should have been a buffer. And so this just says you can continue to maintain that. You can prune those. Brian and I thought you shouldn't be planting more things which might extend, non-native species in what's supposed to be a buffer, which might extend your landscaping area more into the buffer. At least ornamental plants. We are pruning of non-invasive. So I think we're changing to say you can continue to prune your ornamental vegetation and native species. Trying to remember, Ryan, you got a memory in there that trying to remember why we put this. So you can.
I'm trying to think if it has something to do with the Lake Whatcom and tree retention requirements. Because we have a provision for pruning trees.
Yeah, frankly, I can't remember. This was done so long ago.
I guess the way this reads to me is if you've got a landscaped yard within a buffer that we may have just put people in by increasing them, we can't plant trees in there anymore, like in your flower bed, if they're not native. It seems a little unnecessary.
But you get to maintain existing established landscaping. So if you have trees that are non-native and you go to non-native, again, that's fine.
Okay, it just seems a little intrusive. If someone's got a yard and flower beds, but.
Well, I mean, I think maintenance of lawfully established vegetation, landscaping, and gardens within a regulated critical area buffer, period. But we have all this other stuff that trying to regulate the exceptions and
and frankly, it's not like we have any staff going out looking in people's backyards and stuff. So I don't think we know if it did happen.
Well, still, if that's the case, an established yard, whatever you want to call it, I think that we should allow people to plant plum tree if they want. As long as they're not messing up existing buffer or increasing their impacts on buffers or wetlands.
Planting of garden crops.
I'll make a motion to retain and planting and remove excluding trees.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I do have a question for you, Cliff.
Yeah.
On this. And sorry, I'm gonna just lower this for a moment because I can't read all of it, but it's a lawfully established vegetation. And then it does talk about pruning and planting of non-invasive. It almost sounds like there's, after you've lawfully planted, that then you're restricted from replacing. Let's say something dies, are you allowed to add to it or put it back, put another one in? I think that's kind of one of my questions.
So maintenance means to return it to a state that existed prior to the lapse or cease. So as long it means you can't expand it. And so we thought that if you said and planting non-invasive ornamental vegetation, which means that you can take an existing functioning buffer and then plant non-native plants in it, which is not the intent of a buffer.
Well, and this is, though it says maintenance of lawfully established vegetation, landscaping and gardens.
Yeah, so
it's almost,
it's within that area that you have lawfully established out of the buffer that you're allowed to do that. As long as people know you can't go into a buffer and expand your area. So that's why we thought it was confusing. People might think you can expand it by using the word planting there.
Yeah, and I guess the question I have is, if it's the buffer and it's not supposed to have that, how to get there in the first place lawfully?
Because buffers used to be 25 feet, now they're going up to almost 200 and 200 in some cases. So over time, people had their lawns and the buffers keep getting bigger, so they become non-conforming in that sense of it. So my point is that instead of planting, could we just say replacement of, or something along those lines? I don't know. It's up to you guys. I mean, we can regulate it either way.
So I think what I'm wondering is, so we've looked at the other parts where it has in proposing to increase some of the buffers, and the state wants us to do that. Then the new buffer then would include some of these things that were lawfully planted earlier, but they can't be replaced if they die.
No, we allowed them to replace. We didn't want to confuse people with the word planting, thinking that they could expand that non-conforming area. So we thought planting, people would think that they could add to and make the area bigger, that, you know, take down native vegetation to create this landscape area. And we didn't want that to happen. But if we want to, I'm fully support replacing what you got. If it's legally established, you should always be able to replace what you got. So I have a comment, Mr. Chair.
Please go ahead.
I think when I was reading it, why I was stumbling so much is because it said pruning and planting of non-invasive ornamental vegetation, or so you can prune your non-invasive. How about or planting indigenous native species and get rid of the excluding trees? So we want them to be able to prune their stuff that they have there and keep it pretty. But wouldn't we want people to be able to plant native species?
I'll comment to this just for a moment to the motion of, I understand where the motion's coming from, but I think this paragraph may need a bigger reworking than just the motion that's on the floor right now.
Or another option is to get rid of all these examples and just delete all of that and just maintenance of lawfully established vegetation to maintain a general condition.
Yeah, let me interrupt just for a minute, Cliff. Commissioner Tammy, who did the second on the motion?
I did.
Okay, so Commissioner Mayberry, Commissioner Masseri, are you okay with drawing your motion for a little bit and see if we can rework this a different way?
That's fine. I would just like to comment that this section says nothing about expanding into into buffers. It's very clear, says such extent of such areas. So to me, that means what's already been landscaped. I think that people would find it as a shock to know that it was illegal for them to plant a lilac or something in their flower bed, just because all of a sudden now they're within a critical area buffer that just got expanded.
The intent was not to do that.
But that's fine, but I think that's what this does. So I don't think there needs to be a section that says you can't expand your landscaping into critical area buffers. I think that this whole chapter already does that. So I'd be fine taking out the qualifiers here. I think that does the same thing.
Say we just did that. I don't think it changes the meaning of anything.
So we still have a motion and a second, so that's why I asked if you.
Yeah, I'll withdraw.
Are you fine with that, Commissioner Masseri?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And I do see that Commissioner McClendon had her hand up. And did you wish to speak, Commissioner McClendon?
No, I changed my mind.
So Cliff, go ahead. You were doing some looking here and some changing. And
codes always get cumbersome when you try to list all the possibilities of what somebody might do. That's why I was just thinking, if we just get rid of all these examples of what it means and just say, you can maintain lawfully established vegetation to the general condition and extent of such areas. Wouldn't that be simpler, I guess? So we don't have to argue over all the examples of what it is.
Commissioner Mayberry, do you want to, since we were asking you to withdraw your motion, go ahead. Would you address that?
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion to strike out what Cliff has highlighted.
Okay.
Second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to strike out on 1616-230, paragraph B, beginning with including and all the way through trees and a parenthesis. Is there more discussion on this, on the motion? Okay, Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Okay, Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
Passes 7-0.
Okie dokie.
We have Commissioner Mayberry has his hand up.
I don't want to hog all the time here. If someone else got something they want to change, feel free, but I got another one here.
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, on 1616-265, tree protection.
65.
Page, please.
28 in my copy, but I'm on an older one because that's where I put my
Yep,
notes.
it's still 28.
It references significant trees, but there's no definition for significant trees in the definition section.
It's in zoning.
Okay, might be helpful to have it in this section as well.
All right, I'll make a note of that. Thank you.
Well, the reason why it's not in this section is that we're trying to go to a unified definition section for all of our codes. And so there's a line item at the beginning of the definition section that says if it's not defined here,
Yeah.
zoning. So we're trying to get rid of duplicates because what happens is that zoning goes in and changes the definition, but forgets to change it in the shoreline and the CAO. And now we got competing definitions again. And so we're trying not to have multiple definitions in multiple sections of the code.
Okay, well, obviously we have some definitions and some not then, so I'm fine if staff makes that call.
Yeah, ultimately, what we're working towards is maybe having one chapter of the whole entire Whatcom County code be just definitions. So all definitions are there. Because Ryan and I have come across multiple words that are defined differently in different places. So.
And I want to bring one thing up before Commissioner Mayberry speaks again. How late would you like to go? We are at 9:05. How late would you like to go tonight? 9:30? Just want to feel for.
I'm feeling out of juice already, but I may be I'm just maybe particularly tired today, so.
And I can't see the thumbs up this time, so I need a little bit of voice. Oh, well, for now, we'll say 9:30. So go ahead, Commissioner Mayberry.
All right. So 16.16.235. Oh, under item 4, vegetation management.
Okay.
It references now that no vegetation shall be removed from a wetland, habitat conservation area, coastline or riverline erosion, yada yada, or their buffers. Is this a policy change?
No, it's more of a clarification from multiple sections of code, including the shoreline management program.
Yeah, you're never supposed to have been able to clear any critical areas or their buffers, except for a few few exceptions.
It was my understanding that you could take trees, at least from a buffer, maybe not clear cut it, but selectively take trees for a number of reasons.
So we do have that now, that you can selectively take trees, but it wouldn't be through well, that's a good question. Well, how would you do it? We do now have a section that allows you to remove trees in the buffer, and you can do it. And the exceptions to it is 3 would be for your views. So you can always do it with views. You can do it for hazard trees. You can do it to improve overall bank stability if you need to. And of course, it also exempts out your maintenance that we have above, or the exceptions to the rule. But we do have a section here that says that you can remove vegetation, but not through a notice of activities through an LDP.
Yeah, so these are the all the list of things you can do. You don't have to get a permit for it. You're just supposed to tell us you're doing it.
Costs $40.
So these are a little more strict than what you can do with a permit.
So what changed? And I'm just curious because I know people tend to cut down trees for firewood here and there. Did anything change, or have people illegally been cutting down random trees for firewood?
Yes.
Who are these people, Mr. Mayberry?
I've heard stories.
Yeah, so you're exempt from, so if you go up one more, if you go up to the activities allowed without notification.
Oh, a whole section, right?
Yeah. So removing firewood is a Class 1 Forest Practice Act. So that's A1. So you can do it without notification. However, if you aren't supposed to do it in violation of the CAO, so if you're within a buffer, you're not supposed to be taking the wood. It's one of those crosses because we don't review FPAs, and as a matter of fact, DNR doesn't even issue an FPA for firewood, but it is technically, you can do it without notification, but you're supposed to do it in accordance with this program. If you're managing your forest of your buffer, because as we, sort of start to put these patches of forest together, they're no longer a forest system anymore. You need to manage them. So in the HCA section, we have a whole new how to manage your stream buffers, which allows you to take out a percentage of the smaller trees, which you could use for firewood. But you have to pay for a full land disturbance permit.
Fair enough. So nothing changed here.
No.
Not really.
Continue to harvest your firewood.
I don't do that. Yep.
Okay, another question?
Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, I have a question and I've been trying to find it, but I can't. I read it, but I can't seem to find it. I didn't write it down on my list.
What's it about? Maybe we can help you get there.
Yeah, talking about trees again, there's a line that mentions that if there's only going to be allowed one tree, if there's only one tree going back, it's going to be a native a conifer instead of a deciduous. And I saw a comment that was concerned that maybe the conifer is not the appropriate tree for the area it's going back in.
That's the hazard tree mitigation section.
Where was that at?
You just passed it.
Up or down?
Yeah, down. Four. They up. Stop. It's 5-4. That's 4.
Well, there's 4. Oh, 5-4. All right, I was looking for the.
Keep going and B4. There it is. Hazard tree mitigation. Number 2.
It just says 50% of them shall be evergreen species. Is that what you're talking about, Commissioner Masseri?
Yeah, the comment I saw said 50% to be evergreen, but what if there's just one to be replaced? Or I guess even with the 50%, if it's not an appropriate area for the trees, let's say you got to put 2 trees back, one's got to be a conifer, maybe, or an evergreen. Maybe that's not the appropriate tree there. I'm not really nitpicking on it. I'm curious about it.
I think if it came down to 1 or 2 trees and didn't fit there, we'd adjust accordingly.
Cliff, would you click on the comment over there just so that we can read
sure.
them?
Let's see.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah, I pointed out that it's modeled after the tree replacement requirements for Lake Whatcom.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanson.
Pardon me, but I'm a little bit lost if where this tree is going to be, these trees are going to be harvested or replaced. Are we talking about just in someone's landscaping in their home or in a riparian buffer?
So this section starts off that you're not supposed to take vegetation out of critical areas or these type of critical areas or their buffers, except for these exceptions here, meeting these conditions. And this one has to do with hazard trees. So, your house is 100 feet away from a buffer and there's a tree about to fall down from it to hit your house. Here's how you take it down.
Right. So the reason they'd like to see a conifer replaced if only one is because they provide greater shade benefit to the stream.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Hanson. Appreciate that. Commissioner Mayberry.
I'd like to move to 16.16.275, non-conforming uses, structures, and lots. Under E2. I was just curious why we moved from 5 years to 18 months.
All right, so the council changed it to 5 years last time, and anywhere else in our codes, it's this. It's looks like this. And
Well, this is what the zoning code says, what the SMP says.
so
What's the feasibility of being able to replace your home, I guess, in 18 months? If
so
it,
you have to submit a building permit within 18 months.
okay.
The reconstruction process has to commence. You have to start that process.
I just could see that as being somewhat tight for the financial requirement of someone rebuilding their house if it was a casualty.
So you think they'd stay out of their house for 5 years?
I don't know. I just know how hard it is to build houses around here. Maybe Dominic may have a little better insight.
And remember, this is non-conforming structures in critical areas themselves, not, outside of a critical area.
So what would be the definition of non-conforming? I just assumed that non-conforming meant it was within a critical area or its buffers.
Correct.
Yeah, in this instance, yes.
So it could just be someone's house.
Right. And so in this instance, if you're outside of the buffer, it burns down, you have to, and it's non-conforming, like a side yard setback, you have 18 months to start the process. Otherwise, you got to come into full compliance. Or if you have a house that's 40 feet tall and 20 feet tall, you have to have full compliance. But if you're in the critical area buffer, you get 5 years to rebuild it back to the exact same footprint, even if it's non-conforming to everything. So that's why it seemed a little odd that you're in a critical area and you get more time than if you were anywhere else in Whatcom County.
I guess the only thing that this does, that I see this doing, is discriminating against people that don't have the financial means to make it happen within 18 months. It's not necessarily solving the problem of getting rid of non-conforming structures. It only targets a certain percentage of the population that may not be able to make that happen. So I have a bit of a problem with that.
All right. Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, when I read this sections, I had the questions why those had changed, but the comments, I kind of gleaned that from the comments. I was a little questioning of what the definition of reconstruction process was. It's big. There's a difference if you're breaking ground versus if you're submitting for a permit. So I don't know if reconstruction process is defined somewhere that kind of alleviates that, but 18 months could be tight to get somebody out there if you've got to go through the process of re-permitting before you can get on someone's schedule. That would be the only tighter window, I would say.
Commissioner Hanson.
It just seems like I buy the previous comment, why should you have greater latitude in a non-conforming area? And I know people who started building their house 20 years ago who aren't done yet. Of course, they've been living in it for 19 years.
I'd like to comment a little bit on it. One is that if you are not in a non-conforming area, would that make a difference as far as you can rebuild it anyway, or are there limits on rebuilding in other areas? I guess I want to know what are some of the other areas that have restrictions and why do they have restrictions?
Well, like the shoreline master program, if you're non-conforming in the North Shoreline Master Program, then you get 18 months. If you're non-conforming to a zoning regulation for a structure, you get 18 months. If you are non-conforming use, I think you only get 1 year. So,
Okay, Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, we kind of passed or went past it, I guess. I just curious, is there somewhere where it's defined what reconstruction process commencement of that is?
no, it's not.
That might be a useful thing to define then.
Okay, Commissioner Mayberry.
So I guess the other issue I have with this is the more as we continue to increase buffers, we're creating more and more non-conforming uses. So does the county have any idea how many residences we have that are non-conforming at this point?
No, we don't, because we don't have a good GIS data set for building footprints. If we had one, we could do it through GIS. You could do a shortest path analysis, and you can figure that out pretty quickly. If we had that layer, then we could definitely. I mean, it would take minutes to run. So
it almost seems not fair to be making changes like this without notifying property owners every time we change the code that now they're non-conformance. So that said, I'd like to move to change this 18 months back to the 5 years and include, as well as up in B above it, change that from 12 months back to 5 years.
Do we have a second? Okay, not seeing a second, why don't we go ahead and move on? Commissioner Mayberry.
I think he's talking, but is muted.
Sorry.
There we go.
This is more of a general question, and I guess kind of goes back to the point I made earlier. Is there a way that we could, every time we make changes to the code and we create more non-conforming uses, I feel like it's our responsibility to notify those property owners as to what the consequences are for that, because you could have people have no idea, and I guarantee you that the majority of the people in the county that have non-conforming structures have no idea that if they abandon their building for 12 months intentionally or have their home destroyed, have no idea that they only have 18 months. And maybe some of them do, but I would have had no idea. So I think that's the least that we could do.
Do you have a proposed method of identifying and notifying all these people?
I don't, but I guess I'd challenge staff to come up with some way of doing that, and maybe that starts with the maps, identifying whose parcels are non-conformance and what the consequences of that might be. It can't just be, I think Natalie's probably trying to do the community involvement thing, but we're not going to have the whole county listening to these meetings twice a month.
I got my hand up. Can I answer?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Okay, so besides the notification, and yes, that's a piece of it, is one of the things, on my long-term list of things to do is now that we finally have the parcel map online and connected to the assessor's database. And if you haven't looked at that, it's pretty cool. My goal is to be able to print on the bottom of, or wherever, on every annual tax assessment statement. Every property owner gets a mailing from the county once a year. It's a tax assessment statement. And we can, with a matter of a minimal amount of code on that form, put information like what the property is zoned, if there are critical areas identified, if they're in the tsunami inundation zone, if they're in, whatever else that zoning impacts this property. And they can get that every year. One of my concerns is that, when you sell a property, the seller has to do a variety of disclosures, but a lot of sellers, particularly if they are buyers, they're buying from family members, they probably just waive that stuff, or they're familiar with the property. And a lot of property doesn't change hands, or it just gets inherited. And so year after year, decade after decade, they don't know anything has changed about their property. So being able to put it on the tax assessment that we mail, no extra cost, because the piece of paper has to be mailed anyway, just a little more ink. And the goal is to get all that connected up. If you are familiar with City IQ, the city of Bellingham has, one of my roommates actually did most of that. That was his job for like 10 years or more. And he says it would be super easy to be able to get that kind of information on everybody's tax statement. So anyway, I'll welcome your help, Commissioner Mayberry.
I believe Ryan would like to address this topic. Go ahead, Ryan.
So when I was working there, tried really, really hard to get IT to have an outward facing GIS with all that information on it. I was told to wait, be patient and wait, and that it is coming. That I started there 6 years ago to see you guys an idea how long it's been coming. IT will have an outward facing GIS here, hopefully in the next year or two, to make your job a lot harder, Natalie. Unfortunately, Whatcom County has 2 elected officials that are running what you want done. So the auditor, the assessor, is an elected position, and they do not have to listen to the executive or council, and they're their own sort of body. They have their own parcel search, which is different than our permit search, which is different than our GIS. And so whereas City IQ is all integrated, Whatcom County is very siloed. So I will support you from afar, because I think it's a great and admirable thing to do. And I hope that someday that happens and everybody can have the same technology so that our customers are better served.
I have talked to the new assessor about it, and she likes the idea. I have no idea what the technical limitations might be, but I appreciate that info.
Yeah, good luck. I hope it happens.
Commissioner Desmani.
I have forgotten my question.
Hey, We are approaching 9:30. Commissioner Hanson.
Just quick suggestion, maybe we could get a bunch of GIS students up at Western tracing polygons over the visual satellite layer to make a new layer of building footprints. It wouldn't work for places totally in the forest, but probably quite a lot of the county. You could just trace the existing structures onto a new layer.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, would you like to end the meeting and go home now, or do you want to keep working? And I need something verbal, not just thumbs.
I want to end the meeting.
I'm good to go to bed.
And the meeting.
All right.
Happy hour.
I have heard, oh gosh, the planning commission meeting is adjourned.
See
Thank
guys
you.
soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the consultant.
Thanks.
I want to thank the consultant for helping us here tonight.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you,
I
Ed.
had a comment. I think you might have wanted to talk about what direction we're going next meeting.
Oh, well.
I think we're going to go over 23 after we all get a chance to read it.
Yeah, so do you guys think there's anything more in here you want to talk about, or are we going back to 23 and on to 22?
I still have a number of things here. I'm about, halfway through.
Okay. We also did get the no net loss statement from our consultant, so I'll be distributing that in your next packet as well.
Thank you, Cliff. Thanks for all your work.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. See ya.
Good night.